They tell you the palace has no secrets. They tell you this with straight backs and pressed uniforms and faces carved from 20 years of not reacting. They tell you this in briefings that end too early, in debriefs that ask the wrong questions, in corridors where the CCTV angles have been, not removed, never removed, simply adjusted. I believe them. I believe them the way you believe a door is locked just because nobody's tried the handle in front of you. Then, Prince George said 4 words to Lance Corporal Daniel Harrow. 4 words. In a palace hallway that smelled of beeswax and old wool, and something underneath both of those things, something older, and Harrow's jaw tightened like a man swallowing a grenade. He didn't reach for his rifle, didn't radio it in, didn't do a single thing in the manual. He just stood there, jaw working, eyes straight ahead, the ceremonial bearskin hat sitting perfectly level on his skull, and I watched something happen behind his eyes that I don't have a classification for. I've logged 15 years of incident reports. I know what a man looks like when he's surprised. I know what he looks like when he's afraid. Daniel Harrow didn't look like either. He looked like a man who'd just been handed confirmation of something he'd already half known and spent 3 years hoping was wrong. That's the part that keeps me up. Not what George said. What Harrow already knew. The log doesn't write itself. I know that sounds obvious. But there are days, and this was becoming one of them, when I sit at the observation post on the East Wing mezzanine with my field notebook open and my pen dry, and I realize I've been staring at the same corridor for 11 minutes without writing a single word, because nothing I put down would survive a formal review, and everything I don't put down is the only thing that matters. I write 0847. LC Harrow posted, Privy Chamber approach, standard rotation. I underline standard. Then, I sit there hating myself for underlining it, because it wasn't standard. It hasn't been standard since Tuesday. I just don't have a better word yet. And, in this building, words without precedent have a way of ending careers. Let me tell you about Daniel Harrow. He's been with the Queen's Guard, with what remains of that designation, reshuffled and redesignated 3 times since the transition, for 6 years. He came up through the Coldstream Guards, same as half of them do, and he has the particular posture of a man trained to stillness so thoroughly that stillness has become his default mode even off duty. His colleagues say he eats standing up. I don't know if that's true. I know that when he laughs, which is rare, it's always 2 seconds after everyone else, like he processes humor through a translator. He is not the most decorated man on the rotation. He is not the most physically impressive, though he's not small. What he is the guard who notices things. The other men notice threats. Harrow notices preconditions. I noticed him noticing things about 6 weeks ago. Small stuff. The way a footman paused too long near the blue drawing room. The way a flower arrangement had been moved 18 inches east and put back, not quite right, sometime between Tuesday midnight and Wednesday 0600. Nobody else flagged it. I only know Harrow clocked it because I watched him log it in his personal notebook, not the duty log, his own, and then say nothing to anyone. I made a note about the note. That is my job. I am not a guard. I am a monitoring officer, grade 4, seconded to palace security from an arm of the household division that does not appear on any publicly available org chart. My official function is to assess operational readiness and protocol adherence among the ceremonial units. My actual function is to watch the watchers. And Harrow was the only one worth watching. 0847 that morning. The Privy Chamber approach is one of 3 corridors that feed into the residential wing. It smells, always, of furniture wax and the particular dusty warmth of old carpet that hasn't been replaced since a decade before either of us was born. There are portraits on the left wall, mid-Georgian, mostly, men with wigs and expressions that manage to be simultaneously arrogant and anxious, and on the right wall, nothing. Just pale green paint and a dado rail, and the ghost of a bracket where something used to hang. I've asked what hung there. Nobody answers that question directly. They redirect. That's a different kind of answer. Harrow was posted at the far end. Standard position, 2 paces from the junction, bearskin level, rifle at the ceremonial carry, eyes forward. He'd been on shift since 0600. He had 2 hours left. He looked, from a distance, exactly like the tourist photographs. Motionless, black fur, and scarlet wool, more architectural feature than human being. Then, Prince George came down the corridor. He was 11. Maybe 12 now. I lose track of the exact dates. You're not supposed to log those with specificity. He was alone, which was the first thing that was wrong. He had a minder, always has a minder in the residential transition zones, and the minder wasn't there. He walked the way children of consequence walk when they think they're unobserved, slightly slouched, slightly fast, trainers squeaking on the parquet where the carpet runner ended. He stopped 3 feet from Harrow. Children aren't supposed to engage the ceremonial guards. It's not a hard rule. There's no protocol document that explicitly says don't talk to the large hat man. But it is understood. The guard is not a person in that context. The guard is furniture. Furniture that can shoot, technically, but furniture nonetheless. George said something. He said it quietly. He was a child who'd been raised in the particular discipline of never speaking above a murmur in institutional spaces. You could see it, the trained compression of his voice. And I was 40 feet away, elevated, at an angle. I read lips when I can. I couldn't get all of it. I got 4 words. Knows about the room. That was it. Or that was the end of it. There may have been more before. I'd only been watching the corridor for 2 minutes when he appeared. Those 4 words. And then, George looked at Harrow with an expression I've only ever seen on adults, specifically on adults who are delivering information they wish they didn't have. And then, he walked on, squeaking round the corner, gone. And Harrow's jaw tightened. I wrote it down. Of course I wrote it down. Then, I looked at what I'd written, and I thought, what room? The palace has 775 rooms. The publicly acknowledged ones. There are, depending on which floor plan you consult, and which year it was drawn, between 11 and 23 rooms that do not appear on any current schematic. Some of them are structural artifacts, spaces consumed by renovation, walled over, repurposed into cavity wall insulation and pipe runs. That's normal in buildings of this age. That's not sinister. That's just Georgian construction meeting Victorian renovation meeting post-war utility rewiring. But some of them are rooms that were sealed intentionally. Rooms that appear in 19th century household ledgers, listed for staffing, for linen allocation, for coal delivery, and then simply stop appearing. No renovation record. No demolition order. Just present in 1887, absent in 1901, and no paperwork in between. I know this because logging things is what I do, and 3 months ago, following a completely unrelated incident involving a contractor's access pass, I pulled the historical room allocation records and found 7 rooms that didn't map. I flagged it in an internal memo. The memo was acknowledged, logged, and filed under architectural review, non-urgent. 6 weeks later, I noticed Harrow noticing things. I need to be careful here about what I'm constructing because I'm a man who logs things, and therefore I'm a man who understands the difference between a pattern and the perception of a pattern. I've been wrong before. There was an incident in 2019, not here, earlier posting, where I connected 3 pieces of information into what I was certain was a coherent conspiracy, and what turned out to be, embarrassingly, a coincidence involving a visiting diplomat's dietary requirements and an overcautious head chef. So I sat with it. The 4 words. The jaw. The unmapped rooms. The moved flower arrangement. I sat with it for approximately 4 minutes, which is longer than I usually give myself for uncertainty. Then, I pulled Harrow's personal file. Not his duty record, that I already knew. His HR file, his vetting profile, his psychological assessment from the standard 36-month review cycle. Grade 2 clearance gets me the summaries. I read through them with the particular focused attention I apply when I'm trying to find the thing that shouldn't be there, the detail that got in by accident, and got missed by whoever was supposed to catch it. It was in the psychological assessment. Last cycle, 18 months ago, under notable observations, the assessor had written, subject demonstrates heightened environmental monitoring consistent with prior duty hypervigilance. Subject has twice initiated informal inquiries regarding palace structural history with household records. Both inquiries were within professional remit. No concerns raised. No concerns raised. I put a small mark next to that. Then, I put my pen down. Because here's the thing about Harrow noticing things. I had been watching him for 6 weeks, and I had been the only one watching him. His supervisors weren't watching him. His rotation commander wasn't watching him. The people who were supposed to watch the watchers weren't watching the watcher I was watching. Either I was wrong about him, or I was the only person in this building who understood what he was actually doing. Neither option was comfortable. At 0900, I went down to the corridor. Harrow was still posted. 2 hours left on his shift. He didn't look at me when I approached. Guards don't. It's not rudeness. It's trained non-engagement. And I stood approximately 6 feet to his left, and opened my notebook, and pretended to check something. I said, not looking up, "Quiet morning." He said nothing. Guards don't respond to ambient conversation. That's the protocol. I knew that. I was testing something else. I said, "Prince George come through here this morning?" A pause. Not a long one, but the kind that exists because a decision is being made inside it. "Yes, sir." "Anything to log?" The pause was longer this time. The corridor was empty. The Georgian men with their wigs and their anxious arrogance stared at us from the left wall. From somewhere deep in the residential wing, a door closed. "No, sir," Harrow said. "Nothing to log." His jaw was tight. Not dramatically tight. The way a jaw is tight when the muscles have been doing that specific tension for long enough that they've stopped feeling it as deliberate. The way a jaw is tight when a man has been holding something in his teeth since 0847 and hasn't decided yet whether he's going to spit it out or swallow it. I wrote something in my notebook. Not what he'd said. Not what I was thinking. Just 0900, confirmed. Then I walked back up to the mezzanine. Because here's what Harrow didn't know, and what I hadn't told anyone either. I'd found one of the unmapped rooms. 3 weeks ago. Access pass error during a contractor briefing, wrong door, wrong corridor, me standing in a space that according to every current schematic was solid wall. The room was small, cold, smelled of old stone and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, the way a room smells when it has been used for something and then sealed and not quite ventilated enough. There was nothing in it, just that smell and for walls and a floor with a faint rectangular depression in the boards where something heavy had stood for a very long time. I closed the door. I walked away. I filed no report. I went back 2 days later, and the door was gone. Not locked. Not sealed. Gone. Just wall. Pale green paint and a dado rail. Same as the right-hand wall of the privy chamber approach. Same as every other corridor in this wing. I checked my notes 3 times. I knew the door number. The door didn't exist. I wrote in my field notebook, architectural discrepancy. Possible misidentification. Then, I underlined possible and stared at it for a very long time. At 1100, Harrow came off shift. I watched him from the mezzanine. He walked the D-post sequence correctly, handed off to his replacement, signed the duty log. All standard. All exactly as written. Then, before he turned toward the guard rest quarters, he stopped. It was a small stop. 2 seconds, maybe less. He was looking at the right-hand wall of the approach corridor. The pale green wall. The dado rail. The ghost bracket where something used to hang. He reached up and touched the wall. Not dramatically. Just a brief press of his palm against the painted plaster, the way you'd check if something was warm. And then, he turned and walked away. I pressed my pen so hard into my notebook page that it tore. He knows. Not what George had said to him. Not the 4 words. The thing underneath the 4 words. The thing that made 4 words enough. He already knew. Had known, I suspected, for longer than I had. Had been circling it with his personal notebook and his moved flower arrangement observations and his twice-initiated inquiries to household records, quietly, carefully, without raising concerns. No concerns raised. I closed my notebook. Outside the privy chamber, the replacement guard stood at parade rest, eyes forward, bearskin level, rifle at the carry. A monument. A piece of furniture. 11 years old in the job or 30. Didn't matter. The uniform ate the person and left the post. Somewhere in the residential wing, behind walls that appeared on no current schematic, something that had stood heavy in a sealed room for a very long time was no longer there. And Prince George, 11, maybe 12, trained to compress his voice in institutional spaces, had known who to tell. Not a supervisor. Not the rotation commander. Not anyone on the official reporting chain. Harrow. That was the part one didn't know how to log. There are things you learn about a building by living inside it. Not from the blueprints. Not from the access manifests or the maintenance logs or the security grid overlays that update in real time on the monitor screen to my left and display, with calm bureaucratic confidence, a palace that is fully mapped, fully understood, and fully controlled. From the sounds. Every building has a sound grammar, the particular language of its settling, its pipe work, its ventilation, the way wind finds the gaps the architects left, and the decades widened. Buckingham Palace has a sound grammar I've been studying for 3 years, and I understand maybe 60% of it. The other 40% I've categorized as pending in a separate section of my field notebook, which currently runs to 11 pages. The sound I heard at 0220 on Wednesday morning was not in the 60%. I should not have been in the East Wing at 0220. My shift ended at 2200. I was in the East Wing at 0220 because I couldn't sleep, which has been a recurring operational liability since the sealed room. And because insomnia in an insomniac's building means you walk the corridors like a man looking for the end of a sentence he started in the daytime. I was passing the privy chamber approach, third time that week. Not that I was counting, I was absolutely counting, when I heard it. Not through the wall. From the floor. A low, irregular knock. Patient, almost. The kind of sound that has no mechanical explanation and several human ones, none of which belong to 0220 in a corridor that the monitoring grid showed is empty. I stopped, checked the grid on my mobile device. Empty corridor. No active contacts within 40 meters in any direction. The knocking stopped. I stood there for 32 seconds by my watch, not breathing especially well, and then I wrote 0220, subsurface acoustic anomaly, EC approach, duration approximate 40 seconds, no grid confirmation in my notebook with a hand that was steadier than I felt entitled to. Then I went back to my quarters and lay on my bunk and stared at the ceiling until 0530. At 0700 I went to find Harrow. Off-rotation days, the residential guards use a communal restroom in the North Annex, a long, low-ceilinged space that smells of boot polish and the particular resigned masculinity of men who spend most of their working lives not allowed to sit down. There's a card table. A television mounted too high on the wall, perpetually showing a news channel with the volume at a setting that is technically audible and functionally useless. A row of steel lockers with combination padlocks. Harrow was at the card table. Alone. Playing solitaire, which was either very on-brand or a deliberate choice. I couldn't tell with him. That was the consistent problem with Harrow, I couldn't tell. I sat across from him without being invited. He didn't look up. I said, I heard something in the approach corridor last night. He turned a card. 7 of clubs on the 8 of diamonds. Correct move. What time, he said. Not a question. The tone of a man who already knows the answer and is checking if you're going to lie about it. 20 past 2. Another card. He didn't say anything for long enough that I started to wonder if the conversation was over. Then, I've been hearing it since March. March was 5 months ago. March was 3 weeks before I noticed Harrow noticing things. March was 2 months before I found the sealed room, stood in it for 45 seconds smelling stone and metal and something sweet, and walked away without filing a report. I asked him what it sounded like. He described exactly what I'd heard. The low, irregular knock. The patience in it, which was the word I'd used too, in my notebook, patient, and hearing him use the same word with no prompting tightened something between my shoulder blades. I logged it, he said. Duty log, or personal. He turned another card. I tried the duty log in April. Wrote it as a maintenance concern. Pipe vibration, possible. The note was removed. I sat with that. Removed, I said. My handwriting. The next shift's entries intact on either side. Just mine gone. Clean page. I thought about my own memo. Architectural review, non-urgent. Filed. Acknowledged. Redirected. Not removed. Just buried. There's a hierarchy to suppression, I was learning. The subtler the mechanism, the higher the origin point. I want to tell you about the weight of a bearskin hat. This is not a metaphor. I mean literally. The ceremonial bearskin is approximately 45 centimeters tall and weighs just under 800 grams. In still weather, on a temperate day, standing the standard ceremonial post, it is manageable discomfort, the kind of physical imposition you absorb into the background of the job, like parade boots and the persistent ache of parade rest in the lower lumbar. In heat, it becomes a different proposition. The fur traps ambient warmth. The chin strap, worn correctly, creates a focal pressure point just below the jaw that over a 2-hour post compounds from minor irritant to persistent torment. Harrow had logged 1,400-odd ceremonial hours in 6 years. I did the arithmetic once. That was roughly 1,100 hours with that weight on his skull, in all weathers, unmoving, looking straight ahead while tourists photographed him, and children tried to make him laugh, and the building around him held its secrets in the walls. I don't know why I keep coming back to that. I think it's because when I imagine Harrow's stoicism, the jaw, the trained stillness, the 5 months of personal logging, and said nothing to anyone, I need to remember it's not a personality trait. It's a physical practice. Something installed. And something installed can be used. By the man himself, or by the building. He'd talked to you before, I said. Before Tuesday. George. Harrow's hand paused over the card deck for a fraction of a second that I wouldn't have caught if I wasn't the kind of man who logs fractions of seconds. Once, he said. In June. He asked me what I thought was behind the wall. What did you tell him? I told him I didn't speculate on duty. And off-duty? He looked up for the first time. Harrow's eyes are an unremarkable shade of brown, but they operate at a precision that is slightly unsettling in social contexts. The specific focus of a man accustomed to scanning for threats at the perimeter of his peripheral vision. He's 11 years old, Harrow said. Meaning, I told him nothing. Meaning, I was protecting him from what I knew, which is its own kind of answer. Meaning, possibly, I am the only person in this building who has been protecting him from it. That landed differently than I expected. The anger suddenly rushed through me, a sweet and familiar thing, the kind of anger that is actually relief because it replaces something worse. And I made myself breathe through it. Because if George had come back Tuesday with, knows about the room, then someone had told him something had changed. Someone had moved the chess piece and wanted the child aware of it. The question was whether that someone was warning George or testing Harrow. I pulled every access log I had clearance for covering the East Wing from March to present. It took 4 hours. It was not an interesting 4 hours. Access logs are the most tedious form of document that exists in institutional security. Long columns of badge numbers and timestamps and zone designations that read like someone formatted a spreadsheet while profoundly dissociated. And the only way to find the thing you're looking for is to know the shape of the absence. I know the shape of absences. It's my one genuine professional skill. The shape of this one was roughly corridor-sized, and it existed on 3 dates, the 4th of March, the 19th of May, and the 2nd of August. On those dates, the East Wing access log had a gap. Not a deletion, not a redaction, a gap. The timestamps on either side were intact and sequential, but the 4 to 6 minute window in the middle of each gap was simply not there. No entries, no badge reads, no motion sensor activations. 3 gaps, 3 dates, 3 visits to a corridor that, according to every current schematic, contained nothing of interest. I cross-referenced against Palace event logs, staff rosters, contractor visits. 2 of the 3 dates were unremarkable. No notable events, no unusual staffing, no anomalies. The 3rd date, the 19th of May, had a notation in the event log that I almost missed because it was filed under Protocol Liaison, Household Calendar. A 17-minute entry. And the description, Senior Royal Family Member, Informal Corridor Transit. Unnamed. Unrecorded. 17 minutes. The average walking pace from the residential wing to the privy chamber approach and back is approximately 4 minutes. 3 minutes if you're not dawdling. 17 leaves 13 minutes unaccounted for. In a corridor that contains, according to every current schematic, nothing. I found Harrow again at 1400. He was back in the restroom. The solitaire game had been cleared away. He was sharpening a boot, which is the kind of task that keeps hands busy while the mind goes somewhere private. I put the printed access log extracts on the table. I put my finger on the 19th of May notation. He looked at it for a long time. The boot brush stopped moving. He said, I was on post that day. I said, I know. I saw he stopped. Started over. There was nothing anomalous to log. Nothing you logged, I said. That's not the same thing. The boot brush resumed. Slow and methodical, the kind of movement that has become disconnected from its purpose and is just rhythm now. Just something to do with the hands while the jaw does its quiet, relentless work. She came through the corridor, he said finally. She stopped at the wall. She put her hand on it. Just briefly, the way you'd touch something you recognized. Then, she walked on. I didn't ask which she. Some questions have answers that change the category of every answer that comes after them. Instead, I said, and the sound started in March. The knocking. Yes. Before the May visit. Yes. The brush stopped. Harrow set the boot down and looked at it with the focused attention of a man who has just noticed it's been polished to a shine that requires no further polishing and has been for some time. He said, very carefully, I think something was put in there. Not, I think someone sealed that room. Not, I think the palace is hiding something. Something was put in there. Passive. Precise. The grammar of a man who has thought about his words for 5 months and chosen them with the same care he brings to scanning a corridor. I thought about the rectangular depression in the boards, the smell of metal, and something sweet, The way a room smells when it has been used for something, sealed, and not quite ventilated enough. I thought about a child who was 11 or 12, trained to keep his voice down in institutional spaces, walking alone down a corridor where he wasn't supposed to be. Knows about the room. Who had told him? And how long had they known? And the thing I couldn't resolve, the thing that sat in my chest like a stone from the East Wing floor. Was the child running to Harrow for protection? Or had someone sent him to see what Harrow would do with the information? At 1600, I went back to the privy chamber approach alone. The replacement guard was off post. The corridor was empty. The Georgian men stared at me from the left wall. I stood in front of the right wall, the pale green wall, the dado rail, the ghost bracket, and I pressed my palm flat against the plaster the way Harrow had, the way she had on the 19th of May. Cool. Old. Faintly dusty. Underneath my palm, very faint, very brief, a knock. Patient. Almost like a question. I took my hand off the wall. I wrote nothing in my notebook. I walked back down the corridor, and I did not look behind me, because I have been doing this job for 15 years, and I know that there are moments when looking behind you is the last honest choice available. This was not one of those moments. This was a moment for walking forward and deciding, before the next morning's shift, how much of what I knew I was willing to be the person who knew it. Thursday came in low and gray, the way London does when it's decided to stop pretending. I hadn't slept. I mean that in the clinical sense. The hours between 2200 and 0530 existed. I was present for them, but nothing restorative occurred. I lay in the dark, and I thought about rectangular depressions in floorboards and access log gaps, and the specific patience of a sound that knocks without urgency, without escalation, just, I am here. I am here. I am here. By 0430, I had accepted two things. First, this had moved beyond the threshold of professional discretion, which is the line I had been standing behind for 3 weeks telling myself was professional judgment. Second, the person I needed to talk to wasn't above me in the chain. Every person above me in the chain was part of a structure that had already demonstrated, through the clear duty log entry and the quietly buried memo and the access records that had been shaped rather than falsified, that it could manage information with elegant, unhurried competence. The person I needed to talk to was Harrow. He was on post at 0600. Standard rotation, privy chamber approach, bearskin level, rifle at the carry. The corridor was quiet. It's always quiet at 0600. The palace operates on a rhythm that doesn't properly engage until around 0800, and in those early hours the building feels less like an institution and more like itself, which is a different and slightly unnerving thing. I stationed myself at the end of the corridor rather than the mezzanine. Not hidden, visible, which was a different kind of choice. If someone was watching the watchers, and I had to proceed on the assumption they were, then being visible in the corridor was a statement. I'm here. I know what I know. See what you do with that. Bureaucratic courage. A small and insufficient form, but the only one I had available at 0600. I opened my notebook. Wrote nothing. Waited. At 0623 George came down the corridor again. Same time. Same trainers. Different color. Blue today. Some kind of athletic brand with a logo I didn't recognize. Same trained compression of the voice. Same adult at the wrong age expression. He walked toward Harrow, and this time he didn't stop 3 feet away. He stopped directly in front of him. Looked up. Harrow looked straight ahead. Over the child's head. Eyes at the fixed point. Jaw doing its quiet work. George said, and I was closer this time. I caught all of it. He was in there again last night. I heard him. Harrow said nothing. You have to do something, George said. You're the only one who, Your Royal Highness. Harrow's voice was even. Ceremonial. The absolute flattest register a human voice can occupy. I am on duty. George looked at him for a long moment with the particular expression of a child who has just understood that an adult is using protocol as a wall, and who is deciding whether to scale it or walk around it. He walked around it. He looked directly at me. I don't know what I looked like to him. I know what I felt like, a man caught in the gap between what his job description said he was doing and what he was actually doing, which is a specific and unpleasant kind of exposure. Then, he turned and walked back the way he'd come. Trainer squeaking. Gone. He was in there again. The pronoun sat in the corridor after the child left like a third person standing between me and Harrow. Not something. Not it. He. Personal pronoun. Specific. Known individual. Recurring presence. I walked down to Harrow's post. I wasn't quiet about it. I didn't pretend to be checking my notebook. I just walked down the corridor and stood beside him and said, "Who is it?" Not a question. The same tone Harrow had used with me about the time. Harrow's eyes didn't move. The fixed point held. His jaw was doing the thing, the quiet grenade, and I watched him decide. "A man named Alderton," he said. "Robert Alderton. He was a household archivist. He was assigned to the East Wing records in 2019, and he was dismissed in 2021, and according to the official record, he left the palace on the 14th of November 2021 and has not returned." The corridor was very quiet. "And, according to the unofficial record?" I said. "I don't have an unofficial record," Harrow said. "I have a name that a child told me in June when he asked what I thought was behind the wall. And I have a sound from March." "George told you the name." "He said he'd found it written inside a book in the library. A library book that hadn't been checked out since 2021. A note, left in a book, by a man who was officially gone. I am here. I am here. I am here. Robert Alderton." It took me 40 minutes to find him in the HR system. Not because the record was hard to find. It was there, complete, unremarkable, but because I spent 30 of those 40 minutes sitting in front of my screen deciding if finding him was the last decision I made in this building or the first one that mattered. The record was clean. Almost too clean in the way records are clean when someone has been methodical rather than careless. Dates of service, department, dismissal reason, redundancy, role consolidation. No disciplinary notes. No grievance records. No exit interview logged. An archivist with access to historical palace records, dismissed without incident. No interview. No documentation of his actual departure date. No verification of the premises handback. And a maintenance log entry from March, 3 weeks before Harrow started hearing the knocking, that I now pulled and read in the context of everything I now knew. East Wing, Corridor C3 subsection, pipe inspection. Access, unrestricted. Duration, 4 hours. Contractor, Alderton Preservation Services Limited registered, March 2022. A company registered 5 months after his dismissal. That went back through the gate. He came back in as a contractor. Under his own name. Not even bothering to be subtle. Because the people who reviewed contractor access manifests, and the people who knew the name Robert Alderton operated in entirely separate administrative systems that had never, in the history of this building, been cross-referenced. Until now. In a building with 775 rooms and 11 pages of pending acoustic notations and a monitoring officer who writes down too many things, not all patterns stay invisible forever. Just long enough for whoever needs them invisible. I went back to Harrow at 1100. His relief hadn't arrived yet. 6 minutes early, but I needed the 6 minutes. I told him what I'd found. Not all of it. The archivist, the contractor registration, the March access. The outline. Enough. He absorbed it with the stillness of a man whose body has been trained to absorb things without reaction, which is not the same as not reacting. The reaction was there. It expressed itself in the set of his shoulders and the very slight forward lean of his weight, the combat posture that ceremonial training overlays, but doesn't replace. Then, he said, he left the note for George on purpose. Not for the family. Not for security. For George specifically, who was 11 and who walked the corridors alone and who had, 6 months ago, asked a guard what he thought was behind the wall. He knew George would tell someone. I said. He knew George would tell me. Harrow said. He's been watching the rotation. He's been in this building, moving through it, and he's been watching. He knows who notices. The same way I'd been watching Harrow. The same way someone was probably watching me. That thought arrived, and I let it sit where it landed, and I did not look up at the mezzanine where I usually posted myself, because there was nothing I could do with the information except be aware of it, and awareness without action is just another kind of standing still. Harrow's relief arrived. The handoff was standard. Duty log signed. He didn't go to the rest quarters. He stood in the corridor, off post now, and looked at the right wall with the expression of a man who has been carrying a question for 5 months and is deciding whether today is the day he opens the door. There's a protocol, I said. Emergency structural access. I have grade 2 clearance. If I log it as a safety concern, they'll clean it out before you get a response, Harrow said. Maybe, maybe not. They removed a duty log entry, he said. A paper entry, in pen. They didn't scan it, didn't redact it, didn't file it as restricted. They just, his hand made a small erasing motion. That level of access is not a facilities manager. That is someone who walks this building freely, who no one questions, who can reach into the physical record and remove things because no one is in a position to stop them. Someone like an archivist, I said. He was quiet. Or someone who used to work with one, I said. The silence was different now. The particular silence of a theory becoming solid, settling into the ground, taking up permanent space. Harrow pressed his palm against the wall. This time he held it there. He's still in there, he said. Alderton. He's been using the room, living in it, accessing the building. He's been in the records. That's what he left 3 years for. He found something in 2021, and they shut him out before he could. He stopped. Took his hand off the wall. Before he could what? I said. But Harrow had his phone out. He was dialing a number I didn't recognize. Who are you calling? He looked at me with the specific expression of a man who has just decided to stop operating within a system that has already demonstrated it will not protect him. My solicitor, he said. At 1400 I submitted a formal incident report. I logged it under my own name. Grade 2 credentials, flag priority 2, 1 level below the threshold that would trigger automatic senior review, which I did deliberately, because priority 1 goes to the same office that filed my previous memo as non-urgent. Priority 2 routes to the Household Division's Internal Oversight Unit, which is a smaller office with a narrower remit and, crucially, a different chain of command. It was not a brave document. It was a careful one. The distinction matters. I described the acoustic anomalies. I described the access log gaps. I described the contractor registration in Alderton's name. I did not describe what the child had said in the corridor. I did not describe Harrow's 5 months of private observation. I did not describe the October morning I had stood in a room that was gone 2 days later. I filed it, and I closed my notebook for the first time in 3 months without making a final notation. Then, I went back to the mezzanine, and I sat, and I watched the privy chamber approach corridor, and I thought about what Harrow had left unfinished. He found something in 2021, and they shut him out before he could. The knocking had started in March. 8 months ago. 8 months of a man who was officially absent, moving through a building that officially had nothing to hide, knocking from inside a wall that officially did not exist. Not escalating. Not panicking. Patient. Waiting. For the guard who noticed things. For the child who asked the wrong question. For whoever else in this building was paying the right kind of attention. At 17:30, I got a response to my priority 2 filing. It was logged at 17:28, 2 minutes after transmission. No incident report is processed in 2 minutes. 2 minutes means it was expected. 2 minutes means someone was already watching the priority 2 queue. The response, received. Under review. No further action required at this time by the submitting officer. No further action required. I read it 3 times. Looked at my notebook. The 11 pages of pending acoustic notations. The access log extracts. The name Robert Alderton written in my own handwriting at 10:47 this morning. Then, I looked down at the corridor. Harrow was back. Off rotation, in civilian clothes, dark jacket, no visible rank, standing in the center of the corridor with his back to me. Just standing, looking at the wall. He put both hands on it this time. Not touching, hovering, an inch from the plaster. And I heard it from the mezzanine, through 40 feet of Georgian air and old carpet, and the quiet grammar of a building holding everything it knew. Knock. Knock. Then, a different sound. Something that was not the wall. Something that was. I leaned forward, pen pressed into my palm hard enough to leave a mark, because some things you need to feel to confirm you're awake. A voice. Not the words. Just the shape of a voice. Male. Close to the plaster, as if pressed against it from the other side. Harrow stood very still with his hands an inch from the wall. Then he pressed both palms flat against it, and said, quietly, steadily, into the pale green paint, I'm here. And somewhere in the East Wing incident log, in a file already flagged under review, my priority 2 report was doing something I didn't anticipate, and didn't plan for, and cannot, even now, fully assess. It had already been read. By someone who had been waiting for it.